Welcome to the Rock Ag Podcast. This is your host, Garrett Coffey, Ag and Natural Resource Agent for the University of Kentucky in Rockcastle County. Today, we will be joined by Dr. Jimmy Henning, Extension Forage Specialist for the University of Kentucky. We will be discussing ways to improve forage quality on beef cattle operations. We will cover topics such as frost seeding clovers, spring reseeding, seeding varieties, and the single most important thing for improving forage quality on our farms. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Henning. We appreciate you coming on with us. We are going to talk about some forage and hay improvement today and just some ways that we can start now, which is amazing to me. I was thinking about it a couple of weeks ago and I was like, it's going to be time to do that. So we're getting close to that. Yes. So we're going to talk about just some ways to improve some forages, maybe some seeding some clovers and doing some reseeding and maybe some kind of varieties. So I guess the first thing that probably I was thinking about is that we're actually going to be ready to do is frost seed some clovers. I mean, it's about that time.
It really is. And frost seeding of clovers is one of the greatest things probably that ever happened to forages in Kentucky. Because if you think about it, if you had to seed every pasture acre with a no-till drill, and that's the only way you could get it, that would be slow and it would be expensive and it would not be very conducive to good pastures, I think. So yeah, we're looking for that window in probably late January, early February, all the way up into March, where we can get clover seed onto some bare ground and then let Mother Nature, or sometimes we can physically help that too, but that seed really does have to work into that top quarter inch of the ground.
Right.
And then have a chance to come up. And what I think people miss, or they hear that, and what they miss in that message is there has to be some bare dirt.
Right.
If you're throwing it out on the tightest sod you got, and that seed doesn't land on dirt, and even better, the germinating seed can't get up above that, then you're going to be disappointed. And I've been doing this 30 years, Garrett, and I don't want to be disappointed. If I put seed out, if you put a cornfield out, you expect that to come up in rows and see it. Mm-hmm. And I think we sometimes by being able to frost seed that we forget about some of the other details like soil testing and competition control. Those are all very important in that equation.
So whenever you talk about that, I was thinking, there got to get some contact with some dirt. Well, if I've got a decent sod that I'm wanting to get some clover seeded into, what about if I took like a chain drag or something like that? Will that help?
Absolutely. And this is where it becomes more art than science. But yeah, you've got to open that up, and spring tooth harrows can work. And actually, I saw something the other day that I thought was the coolest thing in the world. Because if you get a spring tooth harrow and you go across the ground, you're gonna dig it up a little bit, make some bare dirt. But this individual had hooked up a little air seeder with little nozzles and tubes, and you can calibrate it. So not only could he get the seed bounced out there just as he was roughing it up, but he could also calibrate it. And I'm thinking that's a really good deal. But yeah, roughing it up doesn't have to be sophisticated.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So on these clovers, obviously, if I'm doing this, I mean, I assume that it works for pasture ground, hay ground, the same? The hay ground is probably going to have a little more overgrowth, I guess, of hay. But, if we wanted to seed some red clover into our hay, we could do that as well.
You sure can. And I'll tell you, Garrett, it's counterintuitive, but sometimes hay ground can have more open space at the bottom of the crowns at the ground level than you think.
Yeah.
Because when you have hay ground and you're letting plants like orchard grass, tall fescue grow up tall, we develop things we call mother plants. I mean, they're bigger, more aggressive, and yeah, they do fall over. And if they're, if right now it's 8 or 12 inches tall and leaning over, that's not really ready for overseeding. But at the base down there, you just dig around there and you will find a fair amount of bare area. If you've in a pasture setting, sometimes the plants will actually spread out a little more, and it may be a little bit harder to get a lot of bare ground in a pasture, a good pasture.
Right, right. I've seen some that, maybe personally, I have some that, there's no problem in finding bare ground in that.
Yeah. And in most winters, yes, we can find bare ground.
Yeah. I don't have that problem in some of mine for sure. So,
yeah.
All right. So how much seed do we need per acre? I mean, to get a decent stand. I mean, whenever I say a decent, something that I'm going to be able to walk out there and I'm going to say, yes, I have clover here, or, that looks like I've got a pretty good stand of clover. What were we looking at there?
That you're going to find in anybody's recommendations a range. And we usually will mix some little white clover with red clover just to give us two different kinds of grazing out there. But it takes about 6 pounds of red clover, and a pound or two of white is usually plenty. If you look at how many seeds per pound there are of red clover versus white has about 4 or more times the number of seeds per pound.
Yeah.
So if you total those up, that's going to be more than 100 seeds per square foot. So you think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of seed. But actually, with the attrition and things that, with the problems that happen, that's not a lot of seed.
Yeah.
But it does make me think again, and I'm a little off subject here, but the people who plant corn, I'll bet they don't plant 100 seeds per square foot.
Right.
And they get a stand. And so I think, the seeding rates kind of sometimes make up for the less than ideal seed conditions, seed bed conditions. So you start with 1 pound of white and 6 of red and go from there.
Okay.
You may need to go a little higher. Now, one of the things that we're, I guess, relearning or learning again is that we need to keep a good stand of clover every year. And red clover is kind of a biennial. I mean, it has a little, you give it a little bit in the seeding year, you get a big year, and you get maybe a little bit in the third year. You kind of need to keep that seeded every year and keep the clover coming every year.
Right.
So it's, for me, I think really believe if it was my dollar, I would be doing it every year, and I would be paying a heck of a lot of attention to that seed soil contact.
Yeah. So if we're doing that every year, can we decrease our seeding rates? I mean, would that be?
I think the thing that you can do to decrease the seeding rates is to make sure you're getting a really good seed soil contact.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
make sure where you're seeding it.
Yeah. I can take 4 seeds in a 4-inch pot and get more clover than I can deal with.
Okay.
In an imperfect situation.
Right.
So, it's just something that intrigues me, and I've never really gotten serious enough about it to say, hey, I want to figure this out. But I truly believe that clover is vigorous enough that if we give it a little room to grow, it will come.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so my next question for you is we're going to do a complete reseed on a hay field this spring. I was going to do it last fall, ran out of time, got late, and so I just decided to wait until the spring. It is, at this point, it's actually on a farm that we just got the lease on. And so there is nothing there worthwhile at this point. It is some wild grass and primarily weeds. So I want to get that in some seed this spring. Number one is, when do I need to do that? When do I need to start thinking I need to decrease? It's been bush hogged off, mowed off, rotary cut off, however you want to say it. That was done last fall. So it's short, it's down, 4 or 5 inches tall. And so when do I need to do that?
Well, in this scenario, we're gonna have to get the cool season grass started. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And then, sometime in March, and it depends on the winter, but you're going to need to assess what you've got for a seed bed. If you're going to plow, then that's going to shove you up into, May, and I'm assuming you're not.
I would rather avoid it. Yes.
Yeah. Most of our pasture ground, we'd rather not do that too. Yeah. Or hay ground is rolling as well. And so you really got to assess what kind of vegetation is there.
Yeah.
So you've got two seeding windows for cool season grasses. We can do it in the spring and we can do it in the fall.
Right.
The challenge with cool season grasses is that spring seedings are doable, but very tough.
Right.
Tough in the sense that crabgrass and all the summer weeds give us a run for our money. So I will say this: you've got to use herbicides to clean up the vegetation that's there. And well, I will say just straight out say, assuming that you're, two sprays of Roundup 2 weeks apart using the appropriate surfactant and rate is going to clean it up, then just get it out, get the grass out as early as you can. I would not put a clover with it. I'd seed it straight grass. I would seed it in two directions if I had my options, to give myself a quicker cover. And then try to see how, if I could just keep it clipped not very aggressively, but clipped so that the crabgrass doesn't shade it out. Mm. And, if you hit well with that, you'll need a little bit of nitrogen too, just to get the grass up and running, not a heck of a lot, because a lot will stimulate all the warm season grasses. So you can do it then. If money wasn't the object and time wasn't crucial, then I would use a herbicide. I would put in a summer annual so that I had a chance to had the smother activity of the summer annual to hold back what might be coming. You get a look then all during the season of what have I got out here, You may need to use some of the heavy duty broadleaf materials. And the good news is about, at least as we're learning about some of those labels, that if you spray in midsummer, you've got enough time to be able to come in the fall and put grass. Some of those replant intervals for some herbicides are long.
Yeah.
And so you have to be very careful if you're going to seed, grasses. So those are the two options. Spring seedings is possible. There are a lot of variables there because, can you deal with fescue escapes that may be there? And, but that spring seedings is possible. Usually we're racing against time and moisture and temperature.
Right. So one thing that I want to touch on with that is you were talking about the herbicide. So, in the springtime, I feel like that there's going to be kind of an iffy window is the best way I know to put it as to where that's going to be effective, because obviously if I spray that today, that's useless. So, there's that iffy window is the best way I know to put it as to where we're going to be effective with that herbicide. Yep. So how do you feel about, the spring herbicide cleanup on these hay fields?
I think I'm probably in the deep water there, Garrett. Okay. I'd phone a friend if I was on a game show because I'd talk to the weed scientist, but it's a lead pipe sense that you've got to have some warm temps and you got to have actively growing weeds in order to get the effect that you want.
Yeah.
I know we were doing no-till alfalfa for a good bit of time back a few years ago, and Lordy, we would have some of the ugliest messes you ever saw trying to hurry up and kill things down. And we were using gramoxone.
Yeah.
A complete burn down.
Yeah.
So we, it's just one of those real difficult things to do in the springtime. We get like situations like yours where you just, the seed doesn't grow in the bag ever. Right. So you got to kind of give it a shot. But, I can envision a scenario where you get late. And the deal then is, we're going to be past April 15, just almost guaranteed to get that seeded. And the book says stop at April 15.
Right.
Well, in this case, your circumstances dictate that you're going to take the risk of seeding later than April 15.
Right.
And realize it's a risk. And that nobody's smart enough to know, whether you'll be successful, but you can control some things and some things you can't.
Right. Okay. And I think that pretty well outlines it, is that, it's going to be a shot and kind of any time that you do it. And so, there's some options and it's always a race against the weather and the time, both seems like on getting those reseeded, and hopefully that you get it right when you do it.
And, Garrett, and know you probably got to move on, but I would be more worried about setting up the no-till drill right than I would about seeding date. Honest truth.
Yeah.
We make more mistakes with seeding too deep.
Yeah.
And seeding at the wrong rate and plug tubes and a bunch of other things than we do from seeding too late.
So I worked in farm supply sales prior to my extension career, and I saw a lot of guys that took a no-till drill and they put all their seed on in a half acre, or they went over it 4 times trying to get the seed out of it. And then it was too deep and the seed didn't come up. And then it was my fault because I sold them bad seed. And, there was a lot. So I do fully agree with make sure that drill is correct whenever you go to do that.
And if in doubt, don't do it.
Right.
I've got all of those T-shirts and all those medals for doing it anyway and getting to redo it.
Right. Absolutely. And grass seed and especially legume seed is way too high to be having to redo it for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next one. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about some seed varieties. We see a lot of articles and information, and every farm supply store that you go into has got a different opinion on it. And even sometimes whenever we cross over from, the soil conservation to extension to farm supply stores, all three give a different recommendation on what we need to be seeding and what we need to be using. And I know there's a lot of new fescue varieties that are out there that seem to be doing well. And I kind of want to say, first off, is that this is a humongous topic, but it's kind of what are you looking to do, I think, with varieties. But if I was going out today on my spring reseeding project that I was talking about just a minute ago, and I wanted to put in a field of hay that is going to produce, that's going to last, several years, hopefully the stand lasts pretty good. What am I looking at? What do I need to be thinking about using in that situation?
That's a really good question, because we may be spoiled, I don't know, or maybe we've been blessed. Tall fescue lives forever. I mean, I ask occasionally, in a meeting, how long do you expect a stand of grass to last, or how long do you want it to last? Forever. And the endophyte infected tall fescue does. So, our options for our base grass is, we got orchard grass, you've got, improved fescues, whether it's endophyte free or novel endophyte, or, when do you just say, hey, I just need to seed Kentucky 31. It's a cost decision, and I'll deal with the endophyte. And really, if you're, I'm going to say, let's go to the premium end. If you really are if you've only going to seed it for a year and you've got, the money is everything, then you're probably not going to be discussing which good variety should I use. So when we assume up front, we're trying to do this right and we want it to last a long time, then you just about got to go to a novel endophyte tall fescue.
Yeah.
The good, like I said, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that might have been more of a risk, but we've got demonstrations now that are 10 years old and going fine. I'm convinced that novel endophyte tall fescue gives us the longevity we need, the yields we need, at a reasonable cost. Orchard grass seed has gotten cheaper, but there for a while it was the same price. Yeah. And orchard grass, at least in our experience, is a 4-year thing, or maybe a little longer.
Yeah.
So I think it's gotten a little more simple about moving to the novel endophytes.
Yeah, I think that whenever we actually did another field back about 4 or 5 years ago, and we did a mix of novel endophyte fescue and orchard grass, and it turned out really well. We got some really good results. It's still there. Of course, like you said, the orchard grass has faded some. The fescue's still there. But the thing about that field that I will say is that, it's managed exactly the same. And I was getting my forage analysis off of that field was by far exceeding what I was seeing in just my fields that were unimproved, that had Kentucky 31 and some orchard grass and that kind of stuff. So it was really, I was getting, 13, 14% proteins on it compared to 9% proteins in my other fields.
Yeah. It's it's just the real deal.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of testing on those and other things. And the good news is about variety choice is that Kentucky has the largest variety testing program in the country.
Yeah.
Almost, I'd say, outside of the companies, we've got as big a program as anybody.
Yeah.
So, the way I usually sort out what variety to seed is, who do you like to trade with?
Yeah.
And go talk to them about their better materials, because they typically have a range.
Right.
And then, I would do the research, look at the UK trial, see if you can find it's been trialed here. Most of the time, the better stuff has been trialed here. And then you've got a solid product.
Yeah. One quick thing is that we see a lot of information about incorporating legumes into hay ground, and I'm going to focus on hay with this one. And sometimes in meetings, whenever I say use red clover in hay, I get these guys that are just like, oh, no, I do not want red clover in my hay. So, what about, is there something else, that's going to be beneficial to us as that legume that maybe outside of red clover, or what about that?
That is a good question, because I'm a big red clover fan. So I would just say, too bad. Red clover is what you need to seed. But, alfalfa is an option, but it has some real, I won't say quirks, but limitations, or it fits in certain places, not for others.
Yeah.
But in terms of yield and what it does for you, red clover is really good. Now, if it's cash hay, now I'll go back. If it's hay that you're going to feed cows and calves and stockers and things like that, then I'd really try to figure out why it is the red clover wasn't suitable to you. Because if it's the hairs or the dustiness or things like that, there's a variety called Freedom that UK developed that has less of that. But it really is the best suited for our hay situations.
Okay. If
you're only talking springtime cuttings, crimson clover as an annual can give you something in your first cutting, and that's good. Ladino white clovers are tall enough to contribute some to yield, but they don't really do the job if in my mind, when we're talking, make sure we're talking apples and apples here. I'm thinking of a stand of clover and grass where the clover is looking like half the stand.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's really what we're looking for, to not put nitrogen on a stand of mixed grass and clover. It takes a lot. And we depend on the clover to do the heavy lifting there in those yield and in those hay fields. And so sometimes it may be better just to say, hey, let's just flip that the other way. Let's put nitrogen on for a spring cut or a fall cut or something like that. And, that I don't know of good options to take people to other than red clover, and the Ladino white clovers help. But if you were down there, Garrett, and cutting that stuff and trying to figure out what the yields were, I believe you convince yourself that red clover is the way to go.
Okay. So the last question I have for you, and we may need to come back and do a complete podcast on this one, I don't know, but if for myself, I've got a beef cow farm that we cut some hay on, and we pasture and we rotational graze, and so if you leave me today and I say, Dr. Henning, what is the most important thing that I can do starting today, to improve my production of my forages on my farm? What can I do to do that? What's going to be your answer?
That's a loaded question, a big time loaded question. But because I'm just going to give you the caveats up front. The rotational grazing is critical. Yeah. Knowing your soil fertility and knowing what the limiting factors are is critical, because you can overgraze or do a terrible job with pasture, and nothing you do is gonna, that's the limiting factor. So in a sense, you're saying you got to decide, you got to figure out for yourself what the limiting factor is. What's the worst thing happening in your forage program, because that's what's holding you back. Yeah. But I will go at least out on the limb far enough to say that with all that we've known about tall fescue over the years, and the endophyte. And I mean, there's probably been more research done on tall fescue as a grass in Kentucky than any other thing probably in the College of Ag, I swear. Yeah. Except you could say corn or soybeans, but I think the thing that I think that's not done that we need to do, and that is have the best fescue management program you can have. Yeah. Now that's going to encompass using clover everywhere you can. Yeah. If I was your consultant, Garrett, I'd say, I want you to do a tiller test. I want to know what the endophyte infection level is in every field.
Yeah.
Because we're finding that it's, while it's pretty common to find highly infected fields, there are some fields that aren't.
Yeah.
And we're even finding that we can have ergovaline variances field to field. In other words, an infected field, and I've got one in Bourbon County right now that ought to be 0 parts per billion ergovaline. It's 500.
Yeah.
And I've got some on the other side of Lexington that's 150 or 0.
Yeah.
So I would say, to pick something so I don't just waffle all over the place, that having a fescue plan is probably the single nugget you want to do first on a Kentucky beef cow farm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit on a lot of things that, and I have, as an extension agent, I have people ask me that, where do I need to start? And I think probably a starting point maybe is the way that I should have asked that instead of the single most important. But, I think with our soil test, number one is that, if we're dumping, a ton of lime a year and we don't need it, then that's a bad thing. If we're dumping a bunch of triple 19 and need a bunch of lime, then, we need to determine those factors. But also, like you said, with managing the fescue, I think that, obviously we have fescue. It's here. I don't think the fescue is ever going to leave. We can never get rid of it. I mean, and I don't want to. Right. Exactly. I don't want to, because it's fed a lot of my cattle for a lot of years. But managing that fescue, and that's something that we've really focused on our farm personally in the last few years, is kind of, what can we do to help that out? Where can we make changes to do that? And so I feel like we've really made some good improvements by managing that fescue for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, great question. So, I'd say a way to start is to make sure you're dealing with fescue. Have a plan.
Well, Dr. Henning, we appreciate your time today. It's been great. I think we've got a lot of good information. One thing that I always say in my podcast is that with the extension, there's tons of research and tons of publications and tons of information to back us up and to help us go in the right direction. So I feel like that extension really does a great job in doing that. So reach out to whoever, myself, our specialist, all are great. And so I feel like that's a really important starting point as well, is to start with the extension and get our information.
You bet.
Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Henning.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Ag Podcast. If you would like any further information on the content of this podcast, please contact Garrett Coffey at the Rockcastle County Extension Office. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast.